Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Lori Bumbaco. For those of you who I don't know, I'm an oncology dietitian. I work at Cancer Wellness Center, and I have the opportunity to work with individuals one-on-one, but also provide a lot of great, fun, timely programs and presentations related to diet, nutrition, and cancer. And today, if you're watching either live on Facebook or you're joining us afterwards, watching the recording on YouTube, thank you for being here. This is our program, Ask the Dietitian. And for this program, we pick a topic. We try to keep it timely and trendy. And our participants get to ask me questions ahead of time. And then for this next 45 minutes, I am going to answer all of those questions. When you register for the program, you have the opportunity to receive the PowerPoint slides or any additional content or resources that I have to share. So we always encourage that as an incentive. Thank you for being here. I'm going to share my screen and present the PowerPoint presentation for our Ask the Dietitian program this month. Lisa will troubleshoot if there's any issues, because sometimes that does happen. And our topic this month, if you don't see it, you should see it by now, is all about processed food. And boy, oh boy, I don't know about anyone else, but this is a hot topic, right? Now, I often find myself saying that I have job security because when we look at what most Americans eat, and someone who's been diagnosed with a cancer, there's no exceptions here. Most of us can do better, right? When we look at our report card in terms of our diet quality, we're failing. So I always share that sort of gives me job security because we have some work to do. I would say it's a great opportunity, especially if you've been diagnosed, to empower yourself with some small changes that will yield some significant improvements to your diet. Now, as it relates to job security, processed food and ultra-processed food is no exception. So we eat a lot of it here in this country. And if you were here with me, I would put you on the spot and have you guess how much we eat compared to other countries around the world. But since you're not, I'm going to just skip right ahead to the answer. So we eat about 58% of our calories come from ultra-processed foods. 58%. So I wonder, could we just gradually eat less and less and less of those ultra-processed foods? And if we do that, could we improve our diet quality? Probably. And some of the work that I do here with people is working on that exact thing. So today we're going to talk about processed foods because it's sort of complicated. And I want to be able to give you some helpful, meaningful advice today about an otherwise pretty complex and complicated topic. So I want you to just sort of bear with me as I give you some explanations about things. As usual, our participants ask some really great questions, and I'm not surprised. So I'm going to try to answer each of those questions to the best of my ability, as always. And then I'm going to offer some additional resources towards the end. Okay, so oops, I skipped right over this. What a great place to start here. So there were two questions that were similar. How do we really define processed food? Or is there a distinction between processed food and ultra-processed food? Really great question. So to be honest, there actually is no single universally accepted definition of ultra-processed foods or even processed food. And so even as we've attempted to try to define them over time, they've varied. And so I think that creates a lot of confusion because depending on who you ask, you're going to get a different answer for what constitutes a processed food. Now, what I want you to keep in mind, and what you're going to learn from me, is that processed foods, and especially ultra-processed foods, they contain a wide variety of choices. So we might want to distinguish, and some experts are calling for this, including myself, we might want to create maybe some subcategories of processed foods, right? So for example, you might see on the slide here some things like a hot dog. That's considered ultra-processed, but something like sweet yogurt or breakfast cereal is also considered ultra-processed. Now, arguably, there's a distinction between the two, as it relates to their nutrition content and also as it relates to the association we see with consuming those foods and health outcomes. So we want to be careful as we hear the word processed and ultra processed foods. What does that really mean? And I want to give you some good information today so that you can sort of apply critical thinking as it relates to navigating the decision to eat some foods that might be processed or even ultra processed as part of an overall healthy cancer protective diet. So more about the definition, since you asked. So the USDA defines processed food as this, and I'm going to read it very quickly for the sake of time. It's food that has undergone any change to its natural state. So any raw agricultural commodities subjected to washing, cleaning, milling, cutting, chopping, heating, pasteurization, blanching, cooking, canning, freezing, drying, dehydrating, mixing, packaging, or other procedures that alter the food from its natural state. Whew, that's a mouthful. The food may include the addition of other ingredients, such as preservatives, flavors, nutrients, and other food additives or substances approved for use in food products, such as salts, sugars, and fats. Okay, so that's one definition. Pretty lengthy one there. There's another one from the Institute of Food Technologists. They define processed food as any food that has undergone additional processing, using terms like storing, filtering, fermenting, extracting, concentrating, microwaving, and packaging. Whew, another lengthy definition. Now, as we look at both of these more formal ways of defining processed food, when we think about it, virtually all of the food that is available to us and the food that we eat has undergone some degree of processing to some extent, right? Now, NOVA is, and that's not an acronym for anything, it's just the name of it. NOVA is a classification system that researchers have used over time because it was thought since its development to be more specific and coherent and clear and comprehensive and workable in terms of trying to research processed food and seeing how it in an American diet impacts our outcomes. And I'm going to talk about NOVA a lot in a moment. So most of what we're hearing, if you're on social media or if you're reading headlines or even just talking about this with healthcare providers or friends, most of what we're talking about as it relates to processed food and ultra processed food is referring to the work in terms of research that's been done using this system called NOVA. And that's really important because I'm going to break NOVA down for you all. And hopefully you're going to walk away thinking, huh? I don't know if NOVA is the best way of looking at this, because that's how we feel right now. So this is NOVA. It was introduced in 2009 from a Brazilian research group, and it includes 4 categories that distinguish between the degree of which a food is processed and the purpose of these modifications. So along the spectrum from left to right, we see from group 1 to group 4. Group 1 being minimally processed or not processed at all the way up to group 4 being ultra processed. So let's dive deeper into each of these groups because this is how we're sort of defining it, right? So I'm still trying to answer this question. All right, so unprocessed or minimally processed food is group 1. And those really are the foods that are naturally occurring with no added salt, sugars, oils, or fats. So examples of that would include milk, meat, eggs, fish, poultry, plain unsweetened yogurt, beans, dried beans especially, fresh, frozen, or dried fruits and vegetables, oats, grits, pasta, rice. These are just some examples. Now let's move on to group 2. Group 2 is defined as labeled as processed culinary ingredients. Well, this is getting really confusing if you ask me. So food products from group 1 that have been processed by pressing, refining, grinding, and or milling, and they're used in home kitchens as well as in the culinary world in restaurants to prepare, season, and cook group 1 foods. So examples are so this might become clear, but you might be thinking, okay, these are processed, but this is group 2. This is a whole group in and of itself. So vegetable oils, butter, vinegar, salt, sugar, molasses from either cane or beet, honey extracted from combs, and syrup from maple trees. Okay, so we got these culinary ingredients that are seemingly minimally processed. Now let's move on to group 3. So group 3 are what we call processed foods. So food products that are made by adding sugar, oil, and or salt to create simple products from group 1. And group 1 foods with increased shelf life or enhanced taste. A lot of our foods fall into this category. So good examples are a lot of our canned products. So canned vegetables, canned fruits, canned beans, some salted or sugared nuts and seeds, some salted, cured, or smoked meats, some of our canned fish, fruits that are canned with sugar and syrup, and then cheese and freshly made bread. Is anyone else confused yet? This is what we're using in research. Okay, and then group 4, the troublesome group 4. So group 4 is defined as our ultra processed food, and these are industrial created food products. So they're created with the addition of multiple ingredients that may include some of group 2, as well as additives to enhance the taste and or convenience of the product, such as hydrolyzed proteins, soy protein isolate, maltodextrin, high fructose corn syrup, stabilizers, flavor enhancers, non-sugar sweeteners, and processing aids such as stabilizers and bulking and anti-bulking agents. Whew. All right, so what would you guess are some examples of ultra processed foods? Some of these may appear very obvious to you. So things like frozen, like a soda, soft drinks, candy, um, ready to eat meals. They're like ultra processed, right? They really are just, they're food, but they're really, they're made from food. Let's just call it that. But a lot of our mass produced foods, so commercially baked breads and rolls and cakes and cookies and donuts and breakfast cereals, soy burgers, flavored yogurt, so ones that are sweet. Um, it doesn't mean that they're all bad choices, and that's what we're going to talk about. So there are some criticisms of this system. So as I shared, almost all the food is processed that we eat to some extent. And it may be not really very helpful to criticize all foods as being processed as bad for us, right? NOVA may be overly inclusive. So it may group some foods in a group that are actually associated with positive health outcomes in the same category that are associated with the opposite, with disease risk. So this is problematic, right? Ultra processed foods in group 4 may include things like soda, so for example, and whole grain cereal that's high in fiber, and things like hummus, just because it has a stabilizer in it, and things like sweet yogurt. When, again, research has confirmed that some of those choices, not soda, but some of those choices are associated with a high diet quality and overall health outcomes that are positive for us. So the oversimplification of the system may create some confusion and may actually make us avoid some of those foods because we automatically assume group 4 is no good, these ultra processed foods are no good, when actually something like yogurt might deliver some protein, it might deliver some calcium, and that's might be recommended for someone in a certain health condition. Another good example that I did not include in here is soy milk. So soy milk is an ultra processed food. When someone who might be lactose intolerant but is drinking a soy milk that doesn't have a lot of added sugars can certainly benefit from the nutrition in a serving of soy milk. So you can see how this is getting kind of complex and complicated, right? So also at the same time, we may assume that foods in group 1 are automatically just healthier for us, right? So for example, we might look at something like bread that's made in a bakery and using very minimal ingredients. It's not mass produced, right? But is it necessarily associated with health? Not necessarily. Okay, so we want to use critical thinking. There are nuances to each category, and there certainly are exceptions, and this is why some experts are calling for subcategories within NOVA. So more criticisms about NOVA. Experts do not know why ultra-processed food might be linked with health risks, because that's what the research has shown, that this group 4, these ultra-processed foods, this 58% of the American diet, why this might be associated with health risk. We don't know why. We don't know the mechanisms for it. And researchers and experts actually want to know the mechanisms because then that would fill in the story a little bit better about what the issue is with some of these ultra processed foods because we don't know what it is, right? And in fact, we might be overlooking some other really important variables. Someone that eats a lot of ultra processed food, they might have some other component to their lifestyle that isn't being considered in part of their health risk. So what we do know is that from the research, that if someone is eating a lot, and I mean a lot, and I'm going to share this next, a lot of ultra processed foods, it may increase the risk for weight gain, type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular disease, and overall mortality. So maybe now you're asking, what is a lot? Well, it's 80% of their calories. So if you ask me, that's a lot. So one choice of this ultra processed food here and there is not that 80%. It's not the same thing. And you may not have to worry about that as part of your overall diet. It's important to share this, there is weak to no evidence that eating more compared to eating less ultra processed food is associated with cancer, specifically breast, central nervous system cancer, chronic lymphocytic leukemia, pancreatic, and prostate cancer. The only evidence that's seeming to bubble up to the surface is for colorectal cancer. And there's probably a good reason for that, and I'm going to explain that in a moment. So what some of our top experts are saying is that it would be a mistake to label foods that meet the ultra processed definition and think that if we avoid those foods, we're going to be fine, that we don't need to think about anything else. So that's really significantly overlooking a pretty complex issue here. Hopefully you see that. And we want to be a little bit more critical about our food choices. So how do we make sense of it all now that I just shared all of that? Because maybe you're more confused than when you started. So here's what I want you to think about. Junk food. Junk food has always been and will always be junk food. Junk food is junk food, right? So think of soda, our energy drinks, hot dogs, Twinkies, Fritos, candy, like things that you just associate as being not very nutritious, a flavor bomb in your mouth, a little bit addictive potentially, like you can't just stop at one. This is junk food. Okay, so something like canned beans might be in the processed or even ultra processed food category is not junk food. Okay. It's nothing new. We know this about junk food. It's less nutritious and it also is a lot of extras. So a lot of extra sugars, salt, and saturated fats. We know that eating a lot of junk food in an unhealthy lifestyle over time may increase our chances of gaining metabolically unhealthy weight. And we know that that puts us at risk for other comorbidities, including 13 types of cancer. Experts have long recommended, and we're going back decades, that we should be minimizing sugar-sweetened beverages as well as processed meat, like hot dogs, because that is associated with risk for some cancers. And I'm going to talk about that. So the NOVA system may confuse us away from what we know from the evidence, right, about sugar-sweetened beverages, about processed meat. We don't want to necessarily jump the gun and think that these ultra-processed foods are all bad for us. We know that, yes, some junk food, some of the time, it's okay, right? It's permissible. But a lot of junk food, a lot of the time, is probably going to put us in a different category for health risk. Avoiding all ultra-processed food isn't a magic bullet, right, to eliminate diet-related disease. It's much more involved than that. And that's probably the biggest concern about the research that's coming out about NOVA is that what's going to happen now is people are going to start to avoid all of these foods, but they're failing to really see the big picture here, okay? So that's the definition of processed food to answer that question. So let's move on to the more helpful part of what I hope to present today. So these questions were similarly I included them together because I felt like they were trying to ask very similar concepts here. So if we are eating some processed food, like which ones are okay to eat? Which are some of the best of the worst, right? Are there any that are, semi-healthy, as someone put, which I love? So here's what we want to think about, like processed food can fit. Now, I just want you to always keep in mind a cancer protective plate if you're planning meals. And if you eat this way most of the time, you're doing a great job. So take a look at this plate that's on your screen. You'll see 2/3 of it is vegetables, and they could be any kind, and we're going to talk about that. Fruits, whole grains, beans. If 2/3 of what we're eating on that plate contains those foods, then we're doing a great job nutritionally. And then 1/3 or even less can be for our animal foods. So this includes poultry and eggs and fish, but also low-fat dairy here as well. And I'm going to talk about some other choices in a moment, but this is just a reminder. So if we're eating most of these whole plant foods, so minimally processed, some of them are going to be processed, right? And then smaller amounts of animal-based foods. So examples of some minimally processed choices might be something like tofu, right? It is processed, right? And we might use something that is a that might be in the ultra processed category. But if it's part of this overall meal that delivers all of this other great nutrition, we're not going to worry about that little addition, right? Or something like a bean burger, right? So a bean burger technically could be in the ultra processed food category just because of the ingredients it contains. Now, someone asked the question, and I'm going to get to this in a moment, is there a difference between some of these bean burgers? But this could work, even though some of these foods are processed, we're still eating and satisfying those conditions of a cancer protective diet. Okay. So let's just go through this a little bit further. So in terms of vegetables, all frozen, fresh, and canned products technically count. Now, if you're someone who is looking to improve your diet quality and you're looking towards variety or you're looking to minimize some added salts, then we might talk more about frozen products or fresh products rather than canned, right? But for someone that I'm working with that isn't eating any vegetables at all, ever, I will accept some canned vegetables if it means that they're now going to introduce some nutrition to their diet. Same thing goes with fruit. So all fresh, frozen, canned, dried fruit, and even 100% fruit juices. Now, sometimes there are differences for individuals I work with. I might ask them to minimize fruit juice because we're losing fiber and that may impact blood sugar to some extent. However, if someone has 0 servings of fruit in a month, but they will have a portion of 100% fruit juice because that counts towards their goal, then we're going to accept that. And we always want to think about, sort of this continuum where we can almost always make improvements to the nutrition choices, right? So if we're having fruit juices only, and maybe someone wants to have now a piece of fresh fruit, that could be a step in the right direction. Beans and lentils, same thing goes. All fresh, frozen, and canned versions count. Grains, all whole grain products and whole grain that are used as cereals, right? So that some of our cereals in the ultra processed category shouldn't be, in my opinion. They deliver a lot of nutrition. They're convenient. They're accessible. They might work for diets across generations. So we do want to be a little critical of this grains category as well. And then proteins, what counts for the protein recommendations in terms of a cancer protective diet are lower mercury fish, nuts and seeds, soy foods, and then lean and low fat meat and dairy, as well as eggs. Now, as we scrutinize labels, we might want to look for lower sodium or no salt added products, as well as low or no sugar added versions of products. And that truly is taking these choices to sort of the best that they're going to be. Okay. So here are some examples, and I really like this kind of image because I think it's the perfect way of setting the distinction between ultra processed, or some of our ultra processed foods, and less processed. So frosted shredded wheat, obviously, it's not junk food, but what could be more nutritious than that? Plain shredded wheat, right? Something like a full fat yogurt with a lot of added sugars. There are lower fat, lower sugar version products on the market that are still a yogurt, right? Regular canned black beans versus low sodium black beans, butter versus oils, and soda versus sparkling water. You see the point here, right? The bottom row is essentially what we consider these ultra processed foods, okay? So making some swaps. I think like where I would start working with people is like where they're at and where could they use some improvement specific and unique to their diet. So if someone's eating deli meat every day, I would talk about that with them and I would want them, because that is technically defined as a processed meat, I would want them to kind of swap in something else that they can have every day instead. And when we have something like some chicken that's left over or some canned tuna and mashing in some avocado and maybe even cutting in some more vegetables into that, that's going to be inherently more nutritious, right? And hopefully you see that. What about sugary beverages? That's another thing that I tend to find if I'm working with someone, that's one we're going to try to limit or avoid altogether. So there are other alternatives like infused waters or plain hot and iced teas and coffee. If you're someone who has junk foods every day, could you have more nutritious options? And I think of snacks as being sort of the junky foods, right? So this is just a short working list of some other ideas that are optimally nutritious. There is so much nutrition here, I can't even say enough about it. But these are easy ways to add flavor and texture and nutrition to a diet to replace some of those junk foods. Okay. So not only can we do this in our kitchen, but when we eat out as well. So if you think about a burrito bowl, this is a nice little uh, image that helps to distinguish between what typically might be offered versus how we can customize it to make it more nutrient dense. So the difference between the two that really stand out to me is that the rice is brown rice, right? In the more nutrient dense option. The beans are low salt, the cheese is reduced fat, and the tea isn't sweet. So that right there, there's a big difference in calories from 1100 to now a little over 700. But probably arguably more important, there's more nutrition in this other dish. Okay. Now, some people ask, how do we, I think it's important to point this out. With some of our processed foods, sometimes they sound better than they are. All right, so I wanted to, and I'm kind of naming names here, as you can tell. Some brands are really going to start to take advantage of this ultra processed food thing and make it sound like their products are better than they are. And we call that a health halo effect. And it's really, really effective. So marketing strategies sort of tap into us being health conscious consumers, and they may make their product appear healthier than it is. And sometimes all it takes are certain words, right? So things like high protein, because protein's good for everybody, right? All the time, we need more protein. Or fiber, immunity. Of course, most people I work with are looking to support their immune function. And then superfoods, so something like dragon fruit or acai, even though that might be like the last ingredient in the product, but they're allowed to use those claims, even though they're not really approved claims. There's a lot of loopholes. There's a lot going on here. Sometimes I'll see Greek yogurt, like a Greek yogurt covered something, and it's not really Greek yogurt. Or hazelnuts, like for example, a white hazelnut spread, and it's crafted artisanally. So it just sounds like it's like this thing that's healthy, right? I hope you agree with me. But for these three products, let's look at the ingredients. So the first one is on the top here, sugar, oil, skim milk powder, hazelnut. So that must be the hazelnut spread. Cocoa butter, whey powder, less of the natural flavors. I would rather somebody just take a handful of hazelnuts, right? Because this is mostly sugar and oil in this spread otherwise. The second one, I should put you on the spot and see if you knew which ingredients match those products. The second one is the protein bar, obviously. So a protein bar, ultra processed, and do we really need a protein bar when we could probably have something like a small serving of plain low-fat yogurt or something like a small serving of beans, and we get so much more nutrition rather than soy protein isolate, polydextrose, whey protein isolate, vegetable glycerin, almonds. Well, there we go. That sounds like that belongs there, right? But really, essentially, what this is something that's ultra processed and offering us protein when we might not even need it, right? The only way to know for sure is by working with a dietitian, of course, but I would argue this is an ultra processed food. And then lastly, a drink that offers immunity, but is really just grape juice. In my opinion, we could do better than this, right? I would rather someone eat fresh fruit than drink juice and associate improved immune function with drinking juice. There is no connection between the two. Do fruits and fruit juices, especially 100% fruit juices, do they offer us with nutrients that are important to support our immune function? Yes, but we don't need to drink a grape juice in order to reap that benefit. In fact, we'll benefit more from eating the whole fresh fruit. Okay. So hopefully that helps you start to really critically think about products and especially to use ingredients to help guide some of your decisions. So next set of questions, are there any that we should stay away from? I kind of listed a couple right there. And what types of processed foods would be the best to focus on reducing? It is unrealistic to cut them all out. So I'm glad this person asked this question because you don't have to cut them all out. There are a couple that I do pick on, as I shared, so let's dive into those. So the first is sugar sweetened beverages. So these are really defined as any drink that is sweetened with various forms of added sugar. So the added sugars might be sweeteners like table sugar, sugars from syrups and honey, and sugars from concentrated fruit or vegetable juices. So that's our soda, our sports drinks, believe it or not, energy drinks, and fruit drinks, not 100% fruit juice, but fruit drinks. And there's a whole other list of things in this category. Why do we pick on sugar sweetened beverages? Well, there is strong evidence that consuming them regularly, meaning like every day and more than once a day, can cause weight gain. And what we know from the evidence is that someone who carries extra weight in their belly, especially, may increase their risk for 13 different types of cancers. So this is the connection here and why we tend to recommend we minimize these sugar sweetened beverages. Now, the main mechanism for this is an increased risk of excess energy intake relative to expenditure. I'm going to explain that in a better way. And I already shared this greater body weight is associated with the cause for 13 cancer types. So we tend to, when we drink something sweet, and I just had a matcha tea that was iced, that was sweet, and I drank it quickly. And I wanted more. What happens is we tend to drink sugary drinks quick or easily, right? And we could manage to consume a good amount in a relatively short period of time. And so that really starts to add up. And before we know it, we've had hundreds of calories of just a sugary liquid. Okay, so that seems to be the issue here. That's the mechanism. And we like when we see mechanisms because maybe if somebody can control a sugary beverage and sip it and just have a small amount and maybe limit it to 100 calories, well, that might be a different story, right? We don't really know from the evidence, but we seem to really slurp down these sugary drinks rather quickly. Now, I just thought this would be interesting to share. 62% of us in the state drink at least one sugar sweetened beverage per day, at least one. I was surprised by that number. As I shared, I have job security. So we're going to look to minimize that if we can. Now, the next thing in the ultra processed food category that I tend to recommend we limit or avoid is processed meat. So processed meat is defined as meat preserved by smoking, curing, salting, or the addition of chemical preservatives. So examples are ham, bacon, sausages, hot dogs, deli meats, they're all considered processed meat. When we consume them regularly, even in small amounts, this can increase our risk for colorectal cancer. And studies have shown that compared to eating no processed meat, eating 3.5 ounces every day, like a large hot dog, which I don't know many people do that, but maybe they have a different variety of processed meat every day. This can increase colorectal cancer risk by 36%. That's pretty astounding, right? So we do know that there are mechanisms for why this increases risk. And so again, that's just more confirmation that these foods are problematic and that we should try to minimize them as much as possible. As it relates to other cancer types, the evidence is not as strong, but it is something that when someone's been diagnosed with a cancer, I do encourage to minimize regardless of your cancer type. At this point, more research is also needed because this might be a follow-up question you're having. We need to know more about those nitrite and nitrate-free products, like the natural products or nitrate-free deli meats. We don't know because we don't have any data that has researched them. So just removing one problematic component and replacing it with an alternative ingredient may not make this story any different. There might not be a different ending. Okay, so we recommend minimizing these as well. Okay, I'm going to move on to the next question for the time. Now, what about plant-based products or cheese, like cheese substitutes, veggie burgers? I'm so glad someone asked this question. So I'm going to start with veggie burgers. So most plant meats, as we like to call them, are ultra processed. They're intended to really be like a better version than the original one, but we don't have any information that they are. And in fact, we do know that they are higher, very high in sodium and high or higher in saturated fats, which does not make the product nutritionally better by any means. So some products also use heme, which gives it that mouthfeel, which makes it feel like you're eating a burger. And that alone has been shown to potentially create carcinogenic compounds during the processes that we digest these ingredients. So I always recommend to seek out options that use sort of like our first generation veggie burgers or our bean burgers, which are on the market. And I'm going to share a couple in a moment. They use beans and grains and they're using different fats to, kind of enhance flavor and mouthfeel. So sunflower and even canola oil, and I can do an acid dietitian on this next. We can look for those in the ingredients and generally those are going to check out. So I would recommend Actual Veggies. That's a brand. I love their products. Morningstar Farms generally check out to be pretty good options. Same with Dr. Prager's and same with 365 brand. Or you can make your own, right? I'm a big fan of that. So you can get your own beans from dried or low salt canned, and you can make your own version of a veggie burger. Okay, and it's going to be better than these plant meats that are being used. What about cheese alternatives? Just the same. They're meant to replace the original thing. And sometimes I think if we just eat less of the original thing, that'll put us in a better situation than relying on some of these alternatives. A lot of cheese alternatives and dairy alternatives might be high in sodium or saturated fat or even sugars, depending on the product. Most cheese alternatives are coconut oil and or nut based. So this is an example of one. I just wanted to flash these ingredients for you. So this is a cheese, okay? Filtered or a fake cheese, right? A cheese alternative. Filtered water, coconut oil, potato starch, modified potato starch, sea salt, natural flavors, glucono, delta lactone, olive extract, and B12. I would just recommend someone eat cheese and just eat less of it. That would be my take. They don't have as much calcium or protein. So again, arguably, not only are you replacing it with something that isn't really nutritious, you've also lost nutrition because you don't no longer get some of these important vitamins, minerals in the case of calcium, and protein. So depending on your reason to go alternative with both meat and cheese, you might be vegan for different reasons. But if you're going vegan for nutrition reasons, I want you definitely to be more particular. Okay. So generally speaking, these are the ones that I like to recommend. Good Planet has a really great product line. They use olive oil as their oil, as their fat source. Tree-lined goat cheese, tree-lined cream cheese, and then Kite Hill has some great products too. Okay. This is, I believe, the last question. Okay, so it is very difficult to completely avoid processed food for my daughter who is 10 and is a cancer survivor. Her eating processed food stresses me out a lot. I get it. But I feel it is unavoidable. Can you tell me what are some of the worst processed foods? So I sort of did that are not so bad. And then I sort of did that too, so that I can focus on limiting the worst, but not feeling quite as bad. So I understand it's very difficult, right? So I would, in this situation, absolutely recommend working with a dietitian because what a dietitian can do is really sort of more specifically review someone's diet habits and then partner with that person so that there could be some compromise here and really have some more meaningful, impactful takeaways from that thorough and comprehensive evaluation, right? So that's going to be obviously better than what I can offer in just these couple minutes to share. So for when I think of 10-year-olds, I think of, what are they drinking? Because our intake of energy drinks and sports drinks and sugary drinks has really skyrocketed. So I would encourage, if she is drinking any kind of sugary drinks, to try to limit that, or he, sorry. And I would try to reduce that. So what we find when especially our children and preteens and teenagers are drinking sugary drinks, that it can lead to headaches, insomnia, restlessness, anxiety, stomachache, and heart palpitations. They certainly can set someone up for unwanted weight gain, and that's going to be associated with adulthood, obesity, and type 2 diabetes, and of course, dental erosion. So those are things that's really what I would pick on the most. And then secondly, again, the processed meat. Okay. Now, what to encourage? Again, this is where working with a dietitian could be ideal. But I would say anytime you can, involve children in the decision-making process, because I think that's where there's going to be some of your best opportunities. So it doesn't feel like a punishment or someone's out of control, and really role modeling for them and setting a good example that there is sort of a healthy balance here, to including some foods that are good for fuel, that are necessary to support our health, and then some foods that are there for pleasure, right? I would say doing that, like creating an environment as well for sensible eating habits. So I would say, even besides what someone's eating or how much someone's eating, think about where, how, why, and when. And I think when you can tap into all of those components of eating, then you're truly going to benefit from how you interact with food. Okay. And then consider this. This is my strategy at home. And I don't know if it's helpful or not, but could you sort of partner some processed choices in small amounts with some healthy choices? Maybe that's a good segue to the next thing that I have to share. So, and I saw this recently and I thought, like, this is genius, because if someone's reluctant, maybe someone's eating only ultra processed food and like the junk food, not very nutritious, has a lot of health goals and considerations to make. Like, maybe we can still incorporate some of those or different versions of those with some other healthy choices to introduce nutrition. Because I'm always about addition rather than subtraction. All right. So these are just some examples. So something like a smoothie, and this might be great for a 10-year-old, a smoothie that uses nutrition like plain yogurt or plain soy milk, some frozen berries, but then we're going to sweeten it with that juice. And that's not really added sugar, right? It's technically not. So there you have a smoothie that is so nutritious and delicious, right? Rather than something that maybe is store-bought or ultra processed. Whole grain crackers and hummus. I still can't get over that a lot of our hummus brands are ultra processed. I just won't accept that. Canned lentils, marinara, whole wheat pasta, those are technically all in the processed category. Can you look for low sodium and low salt versions? Absolutely. Canned sardines with whole wheat toast and avocado. You see what's happening here. We're starting to balance. And this is all, hopefully you would all agree, these are nutritious things, regardless of their processing, right? So we also do this at home. Sometimes we need to just pop in a frozen pizza, but we're going to either add some veggies to that process or have some veggies on the side. And then what you're doing is you're really combining the best of both worlds, convenience and taste and flavor with nutrition. Okay. So there's some more examples there for you. I would say also the other one I want to point out here is pre-baked tofu. I do that a lot, and that's technically ultra processed, but there's marinated pre-baked tofu that if in a pinch I need something quick and easy, I just have to reheat it quickly on the stove top with some other veggies and put it over some pre-cooked quinoa. It's like these convenience foods can invite nutrition and convenience to our table. Okay. So that is all for today. I know I went a little bit over. I thank you for staying. Our next Ask the Dietitian is November 7th, same time at 1 o'clock. And our topic is carbohydrates. It seems we have a love-hate relationship with carbohydrates, so we thought that would be a good one to pick. I'm going to stop my share here and just see if there's any remaining questions, comments.